Reddit HFY, the human from the depths of the dungeon. Divided by Inferno Adept. It was said that no human had ever survived the dungeon. Legends spoke of it as a place of unimaginable horrors, monsters more terrifying than any myth, traps that no one could outwit, and labyrinths that twisted reality itself. So when a human emerged, bloodied but alive, from the depths of the dungeon, it sent shockwaves through every race in the known universe. I remember the day it happened. The dungeon had always been a forbidden place. Generations of creature selves, dwarves, orcs, and even the cold-hearted Drakeshed ventured into its depths, only to be swallowed by its endless horrors. No one had ever returned to tell the tale. It was a place where even the bravest lost their minds, where the strong fell before they could make it past the first few levels. The very concept of survival was a fantasy. But then, he appeared. I was on my way to a local tavern when I heard the screams. At first, I thought it was just another bar brawl, but the sound was too frantic, too desperate. Curious, I followed the noise and came upon a crowd gathered near the dungeon's entrance. Most were whispering in hushed tones, pointing toward the gate with wide eyes. That's when I saw him. A human, barely conscious, stumbling forward with his hands held up as if to shield himself from an invisible onslaught. His skin was charred and scraped raw, his armor barely clinging to his body, covered in blood and dirt. He had the wild eyes of someone who'd seen the unimaginable, but there was something else, true determination. It was the kind of fire you couldn't extinguish, no matter how many horrors you had faced. It collapsed right at the entrance, and everyone took a step back, not daring to approach. His ragged breaths were the only sound as he struggled to speak. What's your name, human? One of the guards asked cautiously. His voice was rough, like someone who hadn't spoken in days. Name, don't matter, he gasped. Only, the dungeon, it's real. The crowd was silent. The dungeon had always been an enigma. Every race had their own theories about it, their own reasons for avoiding it. The human was the first to come back, and now he was telling us that it was more than just a myth, that it was real. He didn't speak much after that, slipping into unconsciousness before they could question him further, but his words lingered, hanging in the air like a warning. Over the next few days, I learned more about him. His name was Marcus, just a regular human from a small village. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't special, and yet, he had survived. The town's healer, a wise elf named Alara, tended to his wounds, but even as she worked, she looked at him with a mix of awe and disbelief. No one should have made it through alive, she said to me privately, but somehow, he did. The magic, the monsters, he defeated them all. I couldn't help but ask him, when he finally recovered enough to speak, how did you survive? Marcus gave me a haunted look, his eyes empty for a moment. It wasn't about strength, it wasn't about skill, it was about, well. He told me stories that sent shivers down my spine, about the creatures that lurked in the dungeon's depth, nightmarish abominations of flesh and bone, the traps that would kill in an instant, but he fought through them, not with brute force, but with sheer stubbornness, where others would have given up, where other races would have been defeated by the very idea of such a place. Marcus kept moving forward. The dungeon wanted me to die, he said, his voice low. It wanted me to break, but I refused. It couldn't break me, it couldn't take me down, not when I knew there was a way out. As he spoke, I realized that what made Marcus different wasn't his physical strength or his cunning, it was his resilience, his refusal to give up. Every race in the world had its champions, its warriors, its wise leaders, but none had ever faced the dungeon and emerged victorious. And yet, this human, this ordinary man, had done what no one else had. And that, it seemed, was what the dungeon had never anticipated, the human spirit. As Marcus rested in the inn, recovering from his ordeal, word spread of his return. Soon, travelers from all corners of the world came to see the human who had defied the dungeon. They wanted to know his secrets, to learn how he had done it. But Marcus didn't have much to say beyond one simple truth: the dungeon isn't unbeatable, you just have to keep going. I don't think anyone quite understood what he meant, but I did, and as the days passed, I started to believe that maybe the dungeon wasn't the end of the world, maybe it was just a challenge. And if a human could survive it, perhaps we all had a chance. Divided by Inferno Adept. It's funny, isn't it? We've always thought of ourselves as weak, fragile. The universe looks at us as insignificant, and in many ways, we are. But after what happened with Marcus, it's clear we are the ones who refuse to give up. The human spirit isn't just a myth, it's the force that can survive even the deepest, most terrifying darkness. And for those who dare to face the unknown, maybe, just maybe, we're the ones who will rise above. HFY. After Marcus's return, the story of his survival became the stuff of legend, but legends are often forgotten with time, or twisted into something less meaningful. In Marcus's case, though, the truth had far more power than the story itself. It didn't take long before others began to follow in his footsteps. Adventurers from all over the world, beasts, elves, and even some of the more reckless drakes gathered at the entrance of the dungeon. The human had done it, so why couldn't they? But as the days passed, it became clear that Marcus's victory wasn't something that could be easily replicated. While others made it through the first few levels, none came back the way he did. The monsters were fierce, the traps cunning, but that wasn't the hardest part of the dungeon. It was the psychological toll it took on those who entered. One by one, the adventurers began to fail, not in battle, but in spirit. They lost hope, wandered into traps, and grew consumed by the oppressive darkness of the place. Every time they tried to go further, it was as though the dungeon knew what they feared most and sent it against them. Fear, doubt, despair, they were all the dungeon needed to claim another victim. Marcus, however, wasn't like them. He hadn't relied on magical tools, and he didn't have an army of allies to back him up. He didn't even have the strength or skills of the greatest warriors. What he had, though, was the one thing the dungeon could never understand: human perseverance. "Do you think it's easy for me?" Marcus asked one day when we spoke again. "Every day I wake up, and I feel the weight of it, the memories, the screams, the monsters, the endless darkness, but it doesn't matter, because I know that as long as I keep moving, as long as I don't stop, I'll make it." I think that was the moment when everyone truly understood. Humanity, for all its faults, is something that other races never quite seem to grasp. We aren't the strongest, we're not the smartest, and we certainly aren't the most powerful, but we have something that none of them have: the unyielding will to never give up, no matter what stands in our way. It's not just about surviving, it's about pushing forward when everyone else has already turned back. Marcus didn't just survive the dungeon, he conquered it, not because he was destined for greatness, but because he refused to let the dungeon's twisted games defeat him. Soon after, the first of the races began to change. The elves, with their ancient wisdom, started seeking counsel from humans, wondering how it was possible to endure such trials. The dwarves, ever so stoic and resilient, began sharing stories of their own perseverance. Even the orcs, fierce, proud warriors, began to take notice. They realized that strength alone could not carry them through, but something deeper was needed, the kind of inner fire that burned even in the darkest of times. "Maybe it's time we learned something from the humans," one of them said to me, shaking his head in disbelief. For the first time in history, the dungeon became something different. No longer was it an impossible death trap. Now it was a tested challenge that could be beaten, not by brute force, but by determination. Soon, more humans began to enter the dungeon. They weren't the strongest or the most magical, but they had a quiet confidence that came from knowing the truth. If Marcus could do it, so could they. And many of them did. Years passed, and the dungeon slowly shifted in character. The first few levels, once dominated by overwhelming terror, became a place where adventurers learned and grew. Monsters, though still dangerous, were no longer the ultimate threat. The real battle was within. By the time the dungeon's deepest levels were truly conquered, it was no longer just about survival. It had become about growth, about rising above the darkness that sought to swallow you whole. The dungeon had once been a place of despair, but now it stood as a challenge to be facade, a place where the human spirit could truly prove itself. And in the end, it wasn't just the humans who had changed the dungeon itself had changed because of humanity. Where it had once broken adventurers, it now forged them. It wasn't about the monsters or the traps, it wasn't about the treasure or the fame. It was about proving that no matter how dark, no matter how insurmountable the odds, the human spirit would always find a way to rise. U divided by Inferno Adept. I think it's safe to say that when Marcus first emerged from the dungeon, no one truly understood what had happened. We all thought it was a miracle, a one-time event that couldn't be replicated. But as time went on, we realized something incredible. The true miracle wasn't his survival, it was the power of the human will, the ability to push forward, to endure, to never stop. And if that doesn't make us special in this universe, I don't know what does. I used to think we were small, weak, fragile. Nah, I know better. Humanity is something the stars will never forget. HFY. Years had passed since Marcus's return, and the world had changed. The dungeon, once a place of death and despair, had become a test. Those who entered no longer faced just monsters or traps, but the very limits of their resolve. And while many adventurers still perished, more and more returned, their spirits hardened, their resolve unbroken. It became a symbol dungeon, a monument to human tenacity, where only those who refused to bend could survive. Marcus was still revered, but now he was something more. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a living testament to the power of human persistence, a force that no race, no matter how powerful, could ever truly understand. But as the dungeon continued to grow in complexity, as the tests became even more grueling, another question began to emerge. What comes after the dungeon? It started with whispers, rumors of a new challenge that lay beyond the dungeon's boundaries, far outside the known realms, a new frontier, one that required more than just physical prowess or mental fortitude. And yet, even the most daring adventurers knew this: if there was one thing humanity had proven, it was that no challenge was too great to face. I was among those who heard the rumors. It started with the discovery of ancient text fragments of scrolls that spoke of a test beyond the gate. The texts were cryptic, but they hinted at something greater, something that would make the dungeon look like child's play. No one knew what it was exactly, but the idea of it consumed the minds of adventurers from all corners of the world. And Marcus, he was the first to volunteer. "It's not over yet," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "There's always something more, there's always a next step, and as long as I'm breathing, I'm not stopping." No one could deny his resolve. The hero who had conquered the dungeon was now ready to face whatever this new trial would be. As the rumors grew louder, so did the voices of the races who had once viewed humanity as nothing more than a fleeting spark in the dark. They began to send their own champions to follow in Marcus's footsteps. But there was something different this time. The races were no longer the proud, self-assured beings they had once been. They were watching with a kind of fearful admiration, almost as if they knew what we had known all along, that humanity was capable of far more than anyone could predict. U divided by Inferno Adept. I won't lie, I wasn't sure what to think. The dungeon had been our test, our proving ground. But what could be more challenging than that? What could exist beyond the place that had pushed even the most powerful beings to the brink? The answer came sooner than I expected. Word spread across the world that the gate had been found, the gate one that the ancient text had spoken of, hidden in a desolate, forgotten corner of the world, surrounded by unnatural storms and swirling shadows. The gate stood silent, waiting. When the first expedition ventured toward it, I was there to watch, and so were thousands of others. Everyone knew this was more than just another dungeon or a random challenge. It was the challenge. What lay beyond it, it could change everything. As the group of adventurers gathered in front of the gate, Marcus stood at the forefront. He had not become a legend by accident. He was more than just a survivor now. He was a symbol, and today, that symbol would carry humanity into the unknown once more. The moment Marcus stepped through the gate, everything changed. The world shook, the air thickened, and a deep, rumbling sound echoed through the skies. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. Then, a burst of light, blinding and brilliant, enveloped the gate, swallowing the adventurers whole. And then, silence. U divided by Inferno Adept. What came next, no one could have prepared for. Marcus returned a month later, but he was not alone. Behind him, a massive procession of humans, people from all walks of life. From the lowest of the low to the greatest, warriors emerged. They were battered, bruised, and scarred. But there was something in their eyes of fire that couldn't be quenched, a spirit that was unyielding. The gate had led them to a new realm that defied all logic and reason, a world where the laws of nature twisted and bent, a place of unending tests. But unlike the dungeon, there was no final prize, no treasure at the end. There was only more. Marcus had led them through challenges that were beyond comprehension, facing creatures of nightmare, impossible landscapes, and trials that threatened to break even the strongest minds, but they had pushed through, together, and where others had faltered, humans had not just survived, they had thrived. When Marcus finally spoke to the crowd, it was in a voice filled with the weight of all they had endured. This world, he said, was not made for us. It wasn't made for anyone, but we don't need a world made for us. We make the world ours. The truth of that statement rippled through every soul present. Humanity had not only survived the greatest trials known to any race, it had forged its path in a universe that was indifferent to their existence, and now there was no turning back. The human spirit had proven that it could not only withstand anything the universe threw at it but could shape it. Divided by Inferno Adept. That day marked the beginning of a new era. The dungeon was no longer the pinnacle of human achievement. It was merely the first step. Marcus and his followers had proven that there was no limit to what humanity could accomplish. They had conquered the very fabric of reality itself, and now they stood ready to reshape the stars. In the end, it wasn't about surviving the dungeon, it wasn't about surviving the gate. It was about realizing that humanity would never stop. The universe would bend to our will, because we had the one thing that no other race could ever understand, the will to never stop moving forward. So, when you look at humanity, know this: we may be small, we may be fragile, but we are unbreakable, and nothing at all will ever stand in our way. HFY